Chapter 14, The Ice Titanic. You've heard the story of the Titanic that hit the iceberg? But have you heard the story of the Titanic that was an iceberg? It was one of the coldest winters anyone could remember. So cold that the flowing water of the Big Cold River began to thicken and freeze. Bits of ice clumped together like snowballs. The snowballs lumped together into mats. The mats joined to form ice rafts that bobbed through the rapids. In time, they reached the great bend of the turnhole, where their inertia carried them to the bank. There they began to stack up and freeze solid. Bit by bit, the icy fringe grew from a few feet to 20. The ice got thicker and harder. When little Eddie and the boys discovered it one Saturday morning, it called to them for adventure. Now, little Eddie knew how dangerous it was to walk out onto ice, not because you could slip and fall, but because it could break and send you tumbling into icy water. If you fell through this river ice, the current would carry you along, and you couldn't come up for air. Eddie's little brothers didn't know about the dangers of ice, so he carefully explained it to them. Instead of walking out on the ice, they would have to content themselves with throwing rocks onto it. They began with small rocks that bounced and skittered until they disappeared into the running water at the edge. Then they looked for bigger rocks to throw. They also bounced and slid across the ice. Finally, determined to put a hole in the ice, they found the biggest rock they could lift and gave it a heave from the top of the bank. It thundered down and hit the ice with a thud. Nothing. Not even a tiny crack. Little Eddie figured that if the ice could support a rock that weighed 3 times what any of them weighed, it could support them. He carefully stepped onto the white surface. Nothing. He took a little jump. Nothing. He took a big jump. That ice was solid as a rock. So for the next 20 minutes, Eddie and the boys whooped and hollered and skated back and forth across their personal ice rink. When they tired of that, Eddie got an idea. He ran up the bank, across the railroad tracks, through the snowy strawberry patch, to the house to fetch his dad's camp hatchet. When he got back, he set to work chopping through the thick ice. "What are you doing?" his brothers asked as he extended the length of his cut. "You'll see," he said, and kept chopping. Bit by bit, he cut through the ice until at last he had freed up a large chunk in the shape of a boat. Running back up the bank, he quickly cut several poles and returned. "Jump on! For a ride on the Titanic!" he yelled. Using the poles, they pushed themselves out into the current, and before they knew it, they were 100 yards downstream. The icy water bubbled and slid past them. They used the poles to fend off from the bank and away from submerged rocks. They were having a grand time. A quarter mile down the river, they heard an ominous cracking sound. Looking down at their feet, they saw a nearly invisible split grow and grow until dark water appeared between the two pieces. They had to act quickly. Judging one piece to be larger than the other, they jumped across the widening crack. Phew! Saved! But not for long. What the boys didn't know was that running water has a lower freezing point than still water. The shallow rapids they were approaching would melt their ship. Crack! The ice broke in half again, and again the boys leaped for the larger piece. It wasn't very big, and as they moved from side to side, part would disappear underwater as the opposite side rose in the air. The rock they hit only hurried the inevitable, and the boys jumped for the bank. The icy water took their breath away, and they were mighty glad that it was only waist deep. Helping one another through the rocks and eddies, they finally splashed ashore. Fortunately, they fetched up on the correct side of the river. Unfortunately, they had to jog nearly a half-mile through the bitter cold and freezing wet clothes. Fortunately, everyone made it home, some bluer than others. When their mother learned what had happened, she couldn't make up her mind. She knew the boys needed warming up. She just couldn't decide whether to do it with a spanking spoon or with hugs of gratitude to God. Fortunately, grace won the day, grace that they avoided drowning, and grace that they weren't given the whipping they deserved.